Hey, what's cranking, everybody? Welcome to my scuffed YouTube channel. My name is Giant Centipede. You can just call me GC. Today we're going to be talking about Find Familiar, the things that I like about it, and also the problem that I have with it. There's just one, but it pisses me off enough to make a YouTube video about it, I guess. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so first up, let's just take a look at Find Familiar from the new 2024 rules. You gain the service of a familiar, a spirit that takes an animal form you choose. Appearing in an unoccupied space within range, the familiar has the statistics of the chosen form, though it is a celestial, fae, or fiend instead of a beast. Your familiar acts independently of you, but it obeys your commands. Telepathic connection. While your familiar is within 100 feet of you, you can communicate with it telepathically. Additionally, as a bonus action, you can see through the familiar's eyes and hear what it hears until the start of your next turn, gaining benefits of any special senses that it has. Finally, when you cast a spell with a range of touch, your familiar can deliver the touch. Your familiar must be within 100 feet of you, and it must take a reaction to deliver the touch when you cast the spell. Combat. The familiar is an ally to you and your allies. It rolls its own initiative and acts on its own turn. A familiar can't attack, but it can take other actions as normal. Disappearance of the familiar. When the familiar drops to 0 hit points, it disappears. It reappears after you cast the spell again. As a magic action, you can temporarily dismiss the familiar to a pocket dimension. Alternatively, you can dismiss it forever. As a magic action, while it is temporarily dismissed, you can cause it to reappear in an unoccupied space within 30 feet of you. Whenever the familiar drops to 0 hit points or disappears into the pocket dimension, it leaves behind in its space anything it was wearing or carrying. One familiar only. You can't have more than one familiar at a time. If you cast the spell while you have a familiar, you instead cause it to adopt a new eligible form. Okay, now, don't get it twisted. Find Familiar is a fantastic spell mechanically. I take it every single chance I can. It's super useful for scouting. It can use the help action during combat. It can even use a ton of gear or magic items if you have a somewhat lenient DM. It's also a pretty good flavor opportunity because you get to choose the type of animal your character would summon as sort of a magical extension of themselves. All that for a ritual that only takes 10 gold to cast and an hour and 10 minutes. But I have an issue with it right here. While your familiar is within 100 feet of you, you can communicate with it telepathically. Now, what exactly does that mean? I have always interpreted the statement as implying that the communication is one way only. That is, you can communicate with the familiar, but not the other way around. But a few months ago, I was DMing for a group, and I learned they had always read it to mean two-way communication. At the time, I hadn't even considered that as a possible interpretation of the words, but I'm now pretty sure that what I think is actually the minority opinion. Now, in the moment of DMing, I just went with what the players were thinking, but I was going crazy thinking about what the people actually mean in the spell when they write those words, that phrase. I looked up if there were any discussions about this issue online, but I couldn't really find anything other than a few comments on a thread discussing Pact of the Chain. So let's take a look at some of the other ways you can telepathically communicate in 5.5 and in 2014 5th edition to see exactly what they're implying within the wording of Find Familiar. This is the 2024 Monster Telepathy, which is the feature that monsters use in their stat block when they have telepathy in their languages section. Telepathy is a magical ability that allows a creature to communicate mentally with another creature within a specified range. Unless a rule states otherwise, the contacted creature doesn't need to share a language with the telepath to understand this communication, but the contacted creature must be able to understand at least one language or be telepathic itself to understand. A telepath doesn't need to see a contacted creature, and the telepath can start or end the telepathic contact at any time, with no action required. Telepathic contact can't be initiated and is immediately broken if either the telepath or other creature has the incapacitated condition. Telepathic contact is also broken if the contacted creature is no longer within the telepathy's range, or if the telepath contacts a different creature within range. A creature without telepathy can receive telepathic messages but can't initiate a telepathic conversation. Once a telepathic conversation starts, the non-telepath can communicate mentally to the telepath until the telepathic connection ends. So, looking at it, it uses the same wording as Find Familiar. It uses communicate with another creature up at the start. And then later it says, once a telepathic conversation starts, the non-telepath can communicate mentally to the telepath until the telepathic connection ends. I would interpret this to mean that when they use communicate with another creature, the default assumption would be two-way. That's what this would imply. Let's take a look at some other features that give you telepathic communication and see if they are sort of consistent with that. But for now, that's 1 point towards two-way Find Familiar communication. So in the 8th level telepathy spell, it says, until the spell ends, you and the target can instantaneously share words, images, sounds, and other sensory messages with one another through the link. Now, again, it uses the words with one another. And I think that would imply that the wording of Find Familiar implies one way. We'll say it's a soft point towards one way Find Familiar. So now let's bring up Find Steed. It's a very similar spell to Find Familiar. It lets you summon something that you can telepathically communicate with. So we'll see if it gives us any insights on whether or not Find Familiar is one way or two way. Here's what the 2014 Find Steed looks like. I'll read you the relevant parts that we need to reach a consensus in this video. But if you'd like, you can pause it to read the whole description. While your steed is within 1 mile of you, you can communicate with each other telepathically. Now, when updating this spell to 2024, they instead have you summon something that has its own stat block, the Otherworldly Steed. And they give this Otherworldly Steed telepathy with a range of 1 mile. This is pretty simple, except you can't initiate a telepathic conversation with your otherworldly steed. It causes a problem. You have to gesture, I suppose, to your otherworldly horse that you want it to initiate a telepathic conversation with you, and only then can you respond with what you wanted to think at it in the first place. It's pretty clunky, and some chill DMs would probably just hand wave this, but for a fella like me, what I would do is I would just have the otherworldly steed immediately in the morning start a telepathic conversation with me. That way I can reply to it at any time I need. But still, that gives a bit of a problem if the otherworldly steed is more than 1 mile away from me, or if either one of us get incapacitated. It causes a little bit of a problem, which I don't think the people writing this really were thinking about when they updated this spell. And you can't really shout and talk to your steed to get its attention because it no longer shares a language with you other than the telepathy. This is kind of unrelated to the whole Find Familiar fiasco, but I just wanted to talk about this, really. This one, though, it just has the monster version of telepathy, so no points, really, here or there. But the 2014 version does specify that you communicate with each other, which I would read that to imply that if something says if you communicate with it, that means one way, and communicate with each other, that's two way. So that's, I would say, another point towards one way Find Familiar. Here's the telepathic feat. For the parts that we're looking at, the 2014 and the 2024 versions are the exact same. You can speak telepathically to any creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself. Your telepathic utterances are in a language you know, and the creature understands you only if it knows that language. Your communication doesn't give the creature the ability to respond to you telepathically. Now, this one in contrast with the previous one, it specifies that your communication is one way only, which would mean that the default is two-way communication. So there's 1 point for two-way Find Familiar. Now we're going to look at some 2014 race options, because there are a few of them that get telepathy. The Kalishtar gets a feature called Mind Link. You can speak telepathically to any creature you can see, provided the creature is within a number of feet to you equal to 10 times your level. You don't need to share a language with the creature for it to understand your telepathic utterances, but the creature must be able to understand at least one language. While you're using this trait to speak telepathically to a creature, you can use your action to give that creature the ability to speak telepathically with you for 1 hour or until you end this effect as an action. So here, it uses the same wording as Find Familiar, or similar wording. You can speak telepathically to any creature you can see. And then later, it specifies that in order for them to speak to you telepathically, you have to use your action to do it, implying that when you first link using the wording of you can speak to any creature you can see, it implies that that is one way only. So that's, I would say, a pretty strong point towards one-way Find Familiar. Next, we'll look at the Verdan's limited telepathy feature. It says you can telepathically speak to any creature you can see within 30 feet. You don't need to share a language with the creature for it to understand your telepathy, but it must be able to understand at least one language. This process of communication is slow and limited, allowing you to transmit and receive only simple ideas and straightforward concepts. So this one, if you look at it, it says you can telepathically speak to any creature. That's similar wording that Find Familiar uses, but later on, it mentions you transmitting and receiving simple ideas and concepts. So that's a pretty strong point towards Find Familiar being two-way, because it's written the same way, but later it mentions you transmitting and receiving. The Ghostwise Halfling has the feature Silent Speech. You can speak telepathically to any creature within 30 feet of you. The creature understands you only if the two of you share a language. You can speak telepathically in this way to one creature at a time. Now this one has the exact same problems as Find Familiar. It doesn't really specify whether it's one way or two way. So this one is a point to neither. It's also just bad. Now, the last race we're going to look at is Thri-kreen and their Thri-kreen telepathy trait. It says, without the assistance of magic, you can't speak the non-Thri-kreen languages you know. Instead, you use telepathy to convey your thoughts. You have the magical ability to transmit your thoughts mentally to willing creatures within 120 feet of yourself. A contacted creature doesn't need to share a language with you to understand your thoughts, but it must be able to understand at least one language. Your telepathic link to a creature is broken if you and the creature move more than 120 feet apart, if either of you is incapacitated, or if either of you mentally breaks the contact. No action required. So, it also has the same problems as Find Familiar and Ghostwise. It does not really specify later what is going on. So I can't really give a point to what the default is here. We're going to just have to... This one sucks. Okay, so now we're going to look at the telepathic speech feature from Aberrant Mind Sorcerer and the Awakened Mind feature from the Great Old One Warlock. So in 2024, both of these features are exactly the same. And they are also exactly the same with the 2014 version of Aberrant Mind Sorcerer's telepathic speech. So let's take a look at the Black Sheep first, the 2014 Great Old One Warlock Awakened Mind feature. You can telepathically speak to any creature you can see within 30 feet of you. You don't need to share a language with the creature for it to understand your telepathic utterances, but the creature must be able to understand at least one language. This one, we can see, again, is poorly written in my opinion. It has the same problems as Find Familiar. It doesn't specify whether it's one-way or two-way. So no points given out there, but we'll take a look at the telepathic speech option from the 2014 Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, which is the same as both of these features from 2024. You can form a telepathic connection between your mind and the mind of another. As a bonus action, choose one creature you can see within 30 feet of you. You and the chosen creature can speak telepathically with each other while the two of you are within a number of miles of each other equal to your charisma modifier, minimum of 1 mile. To understand each other, you must speak mentally in a language the other knows. The telepathic connection lasts for a number of minutes equal to your sorcerer or warlock level. It ends early if you are incapacitated or die, or if you use this ability to form a connection with a different creature. Now, these versions, the 2024 telepathic speech and awakened mind, and the 2014 telepathic speech, I would say these all together make a pretty strong case towards one-way Find Familiar, because they specify you can speak telepathically with each other. Since that differs from Find Familiar, that would imply that Find Familiar has a different function and that it's one way only. So one more point to Find Familiar one way. Here's the Psychic Whispers feature from the 2014 Soul Knife Rogue. You can establish telepathic communication between yourself and others. As an action, choose one or more creatures you can see, up to a number of creatures equal to your proficiency bonus, and then roll one psionic energy die. For a number of hours equal to the number rolled, the chosen creatures can speak telepathically with you, and you can speak telepathically with them. To send or receive a message, no action required, you and the other creature must be within 1 mile of each other. A creature can't use this telepathy if it can't speak any languages, and a creature can end the telepathic connection at any time. No action required. You and the creature don't need to speak a common language to understand each other. Now, I would say this is a pretty strong point towards one-way Find Familiar, just because it specifies that you speak telepathically with them and they to you, which supposes the default is one way only. Now, when updating it to 2024, it's all the exact same, except they get rid of this last sentence. I don't know why. I don't think it, I still think it's ruled the same. They just purposefully removed clarity from it, probably to make room for other stuff. I know formatting is really hard to do in books, but I think it's nice to have clarity about that. But maybe it's a nerf. Maybe you do need to speak a common language now. But they should specify that if you do. They just got rid of clarity. Some of the telepathy in this game is it's bad. So, after looking at all that, I feel pretty confident in ruling that the telepathy in Find Familiar is one way only. Our score was 5-3. But the point that I'm trying to make in this video is that I shouldn't have to do all of that to be confident about my ruling. These telepathy rules should be clearer with how they work. They should specify whether you are communicating with ideas or words, how the telepathic link is initiated and broken, whether you have to share a language, and whether it's one way or two way. And I don't think that your horse should have to think at you every morning to have its telepathy on standby. I think they should tweak that. again, a chill DM would probably hand wave all of this stuff and just like vibe it out based off of what they think it means. But I think it's important to detail all of this stuff for players and DMs like me that like to play within the rules to have fun. Anyways, thanks for watching, folks. Remember that I'm in your walls and I'm gonna get you. Bye.